if I had you in my office and I was going to take you through hypnotic induction technique because you wanted to quit smoking or you were having anxiety attacks, I would take you through a series of activities. The first time I hypnotize a person is always the most difficult because they're not sure if they can trust me, they've never been hypnotized before, whatever. So it's more nervous, and it's harder to get the person into a trance, into an altered state of consciousness, if you will. So, if I successfully do it, then I'm going to want to make life easy. I'm a lazy psychologist. I want to make life easy. The second time they come back to my office. So, what I'll use is a series of commands. I'll do something like, can I pick on you here, Debbie?
Yeah.
Oh, Debbie, we're in my office and we're finishing up our session. Debbie, I'd like you to think of a color that you enjoy, a color that makes you feel relaxed. And I'd like you to put a shape around that color, whatever shape makes you feel comfortable. And I'd like you to breathe deeply as you look at that color. Breathing very deeply. Let the color come closer to you and the shape come closer. As you breathe out, would you let the shape go away? Breathe in and let the shape come closer. Breathe out and go away. Slowly watching the color. Letting it come just a little bit closer with each breath. Let the color become more intense as it comes closer. Breathing deeply, feeling relaxed. And the next time we get together again, I want you to remember this color and the shape. So that when we start, you can relax, breathe deeply. Imagine the color, the shape. And closer, more intense. Closer. How'd it work for you, Deb?
I'm with you.
You're with me. Okay, now that's interesting because it does work. It works very well. Here's the more interesting thing. How many of you was it working on as I was doing it? How many of you started feeling relaxed? How many of you saw the color and the shape? Yeah, isn't that interesting? Now, here's a big lesson. There's actually a book written in the 1980s. I read it because I was doing some training for chaplains. Now remember, I'm still a little bit religious at this time. It's called Overhearing the Gospel. This guy actually teaches the technique I just showed you for ministers. Ministers are actually being trained in this technique, but you don't know what the technique is. You think you do, but you don't. Here's the technique. I am maybe working with Debbie, supposedly hypnotizing her. What I'm really doing is I'm hypnotizing everybody in this room. Everybody in this room, I don't care if even if you didn't raise your hand in my earlier question, I would guarantee if I had an EKG or some kind of galvanic skin response, GSR machine on your skin, I would have seen your body changing as I was talking to you. 100% of this room was responding. I didn't see anybody getting rigid. Nobody went the opposite direction that I could see in. So, the technique is very, very powerful. Say that I'm hypnotizing Debbie while hypnotizing the whole rest of the group in some way. Now, hypnosis is a big, strong word, and I'm really not going to say I was hypnotizing you. What I was doing was helping take you into an altered state of consciousness. It was a different state of consciousness than you were before I started talking. That's literally all I'm saying. Now let's translate that to what ministers do, because ministers also do things like pray. I'm going to pray for Debbie here. Debbie, I want you to just open your heart to Jesus. I want you to feel the power of God coming into you. I want you to think the most beautiful thoughts about Jesus and how He's helped you in your life. Breathe deeply and take in the Holy Spirit, if you would, Debbie, and feel how God is speaking to you. Right? Now, I'm talking and I'm praying over Debbie. But all of you are hearing too, aren't you? I'm doing the same thing to you that I'm doing to her. Now let's put a little piece on here. Remember, we used the color and the shape. In psychology, hypnotic techniques, that's called a trigger. A trigger. Well, if I can give a trigger, then I can get the whole congregation to go into that trance state much faster. Just like I can get Debbie to go into her trance the next time she comes into my office by simply asking her to remember the shape and the color. Well, the next time you come back to the church and you hear me praying, if I've used a trigger word, you're going to go right back into it. So, I'm going to pray. Debbie, we just pray that you bring Jesus into your life. We just ask that Jesus come into you. We just pray that you open your heart and let Jesus and the Holy Spirit fill you. Have you heard that kind of praying before? Yeah. What's the word just doing in that sermon, in that prayer? It's a trigger. Right. It has no meaning whatsoever. We just. This is a new technique. It started about 15 or 20 years ago. Until about, 1990, I never heard of anybody praying with just. I just hadn't heard that before. But this technique starts up and you wonder, did somebody actually intentionally design this technique? I don't think so. Because I've asked people who pray like this, why do you use the word just in there? And they don't know. But it works. And successful techniques are propagated. Just like viruses are spread. If you get a good praying technique that helps you hypnotize the whole congregation, you keep doing it. Because more money comes in and more members come in. It's that simple. But the ministers don't actually know they're doing. They're oblivious to these techniques. Just like you're oblivious to the language you speak. I mean, you don't sit here and think, what next word should I use in the English language? You don't do that. You just naturally do it. Well, if you're raised in a religion, if you're trained as thoroughly as these ministers are in how to do this stuff, they don't even think about it. It's just a part of how they interact. There's a rousing song by the choir, and that gives you some sense of hope. Then there's this minister stands up with his trophy blonde hot wife. They're both in their mid-30s, and they're talking, this is the sermon this week, on how Jesus can help your marriage and how to help their marriage. I mean, she is hot. I'm saying, and they got these 3 sons down here, and they're talking about how Jesus helps them raise these 3 boys. My mother had 4 boys. I know Jesus, she needed more than Jesus to raise that. 3 boys. And when they're finished, about the time they're finished, I'm starting to believe them. And they've gotten me into this. And I've been divorced twice, so I know. But what's a 30-something-year-old guy and his wife know about marriage compared to what I... the rational mind on me was shut down temporarily. It was kind of interesting. He didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And 2 years later, they found he bumped the choir director. And, they fired the choir director. They didn't fire him. That's interesting. They forgave him. We'll come back and find out why he was forgiven in a little while. At the end, there's a song about commitment. Of course, just as the offering plate is being passed, this is a kind of an evangelical church. And then at the end, there's a rousing song of joy and hope, going out there. You got your fix this week. You'll be back next week to get your next fix. So you don't feel quite as guilty. But look at this. What an emotional roller coaster. This is send you on. And it is designed to do exactly what it does. It's designed to get more members. It's designed to make you feel guilty. It's designed to make you give more money. That's what it's designed to do. So, I want you to remember this. Next time you go into a wedding, somebody's wedding in a church or funeral or whatever, I want you to remember that mosques, churches are emotional manipulation zones. And they're designed with hundreds of triggers. Hundreds of triggers are involved in any church. You walk in the church and you see this kind of thing. Just count how many triggers you see in there. Now, if you're Catholic, those triggers mean a lot to you. If you're not Catholic, they don't mean as much to you. Because you learned those triggers as a Catholic. Stained glass windows. You've got stained glass windows in almost any kind of church these days, but they're still triggers.